The meteor had come down 3 nights ago, and Daniel Hart had almost forgot about it. He remembered the flash, the long, rolling boom that shook the greenhouse glass, and the way his tea had spilled across the soil samples he was cataloging. But meteors were common on Verath 9. The planet sat in a thin debris belt, and small rocks fell from the sky the way rain fell on other worlds. Daniel had logged it, gone back to work, and let the matter drop. Now walking the outer perimeter at dawn, with his scanner in hand, he saw the crater for the first time. It sat just behind the greenhouse, a shallow black scar in the pale soil, no wider than a dinner table. Daniel frowned. The trajectory had looked farther north from his window. He stepped closer. Something inside the crater moved. Daniel froze. His hand went to the small stun baton on his belt, a useless weapon against most things on this planet, but the only one he carried. Verath 9 was classified as low threat. The Galactic Survey Council had stationed him here alone, precisely because nothing dangerous was supposed to live in this sector. He crouched at the edge of the crater and looked down. A small creature was curled at the bottom, half buried in the cooling ash. It was no bigger than a house cat. Silver scales covered its body, each one glinting like a polished coin. 4 legs, 2 folded wings, a long tail with a cracked shell fragment still stuck to the tip. Its eyes were closed. Its chest was rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. A thin line of dark blood ran from a cut above its tiny snout. Daniel stared. He had read every species report on this planet twice, and nothing in any file matched what he was looking at. He should have called it in. The rules were clear. Any unregistered life form had to be reported within 1 hour of discovery. Survey protocol demanded quarantine scans, distance. Daniel knew all of this. He also knew that this creature had just survived a meteor impact, was clearly injured, and was breathing in the thin, cold air of a crater that would be freezing again by nightfall. He climbed down. The creature did not move as he approached. Daniel knelt beside it, slow and careful, and placed 2 fingers against its side. The scales were warm, much warmer than he expected. A small tremor ran through its body, and one amber eye cracked open just enough to look at him. It did not flinch. It did not hiss. It just looked. Daniel let out a breath he had not known he was holding. He took off his outer jacket, wrapped it around the small body, and lifted it gently. It weighed almost nothing. The tail curled weakly around his wrist, as if looking for something to hold. Back inside the outpost, he laid it on the spare cot in the medical alcove. His medkit was designed for humans, but he had enough general supplies to clean the cut, check for broken bones, and warm a small dish of nutrient paste he usually fed to injured ground fowl. He set the dish beside the creature and waited. The amber eye opened again. The creature sniffed the paste, then sniffed Daniel's fingers, then slowly it began to eat. Daniel watched from across the room, hardly daring to breathe. He had been alone on Verath 9 for just over 2 years. His last human conversation had been a grainy call with his sister 4 months ago, and it had lasted 6 minutes before the signal dropped. He told himself he was fine. He told himself the plants were company enough, that the routine kept him steady, that the silence did not bother him. Watching the small silver thing eat, he realized how much he had been lying. When the dish was empty, the creature let out a soft sound somewhere between a purr and a chirp, and pressed its head into Daniel's palm. Daniel laughed, a short surprised sound that felt rusty. His throat, he did not remember the last time he had laughed. He reached for his logbook, then stopped. If he reported this now, containment ship would arrive within a week. They would take the creature, run tests on it, and probably kill it in the process. Vareth 9 was deep in unclaimed space, and there was no one to stop them. Daniel closed the logbook. He would report it later when he understood more. He needed a name, not a species designation, something for himself. He looked at the small silver body curled now on the cot, at the cracked shell fragment he had gently removed from the tail, at the quiet rise and fall of its breathing. Rook, he said out loud. The word felt right. A rook was a small dark piece on a chessboard, a piece that moved in straight, honest lines. I'll call you Rook. The creature's tail twitched, one amber eye opened again, studied him for a long moment, and closed. Daniel stayed beside the cot until the twin sons of Vareth 9 rose above the tree line, painting the greenhouse glass in pale gold. He made himself a new cup of tea. He checked the outpost systems. He went about his morning routine, the same one he had followed for 732 days. But when he looked over his shoulder, there was something silver curled on the cot, breathing softly. The outpost did not feel empty anymore. Outside in the thin morning light, the crater sat quiet and black. A wind moved through the tree line beyond the perimeter fence, and the long grass bent in waves. Daniel did not see the shape that stood still among the trees, watching the greenhouse windows with too many eyes. He went to feed his new friend. The shape in the trees did not move. Not yet. Rook healed faster than anything Daniel had ever seen. Cut above his snout sealed in 2 days. The bruise along his ribs faded in 3. By the end of the first week, the small silver creature was climbing onto Daniel's shoulder as he worked, wrapping his tail around the back of Daniel's neck and watching everything with quiet amber eyes. He made soft chirping sounds. When Daniel spoke to him, he hissed at the sound of the outpost's water pump, which he clearly did not trust. He refused to eat the green paste, but loved the red one, and if Daniel forgot to feed him at sunrise, Rook would bite the edge of his boot until the mistake was corrected. Daniel started talking to him the way man talks to a dog, complaints about the scanner batteries, stories about his sister back home, long quiet explanations of what each plant in the greenhouse was for. Rook listened with his head tilted as if he understood more than he should have. It was on the 10th morning that the gifts began. Daniel woke up to find a small, smooth stone sitting in the center of his pillow, right beside his cheek. He blinked at it for a long moment. Still half asleep, the stone was pale blue, almost round, polished so smoothly it looked like it had been tumbled in a river for 100 years. Vareth 9 had no rivers. Daniel had hiked every patch of ground within 10 km of the outpost, and he had never seen a stone like this. 1. Rook was sitting at the end of the cot, tail wagging slowly, amber eyes fixed on Daniel's face, waiting. "Did you put this here?" Daniel asked. Rook chirped and stood up on his small legs, proud as a hunting dog with a fresh kill. Daniel picked up the stone and turned it over in his hand. It was heavier than it looked. He laughed, the short, surprised sound he was learning to make again, and scratched Rook behind the small silver, horns beginning to bud on his head. "Thank you," he said. "It's a good stone." Rook pressed his face into Daniel's palm and made a sound like a pot of water starting to boil, a purr Daniel had decided to call it the small silver. Dragon was pleased with himself. The next morning it was a flower. Daniel found it on the kitchen counter, placed neatly beside his empty teacup. Single blue-petaled flower with a long, curling stem still damp at the root. It was a species Daniel recognized from the survey reports, but only barely. These flowers grew on the eastern ridge, place classified as too geologically unstable to visit. Daniel had never been closer than 3 km to that ridge in 2 years. He looked at Rook, who was sitting very straight on the counter, tail curled around his feet. "You went to the ridge?" Rook chirped. "By yourself?" Rook chirped louder. Daniel put the flower in a small glass of water and set it on the windowsill. "That's very far for a small dragon. You should not go that far alone." Rook ignored this entirely. The gifts kept coming. On the third day, a broken piece of dark red pottery, its edges worn smooth by time. Daniel had no idea where it had come from. Vareth 9 had no recorded civilizations, ancient or modern. He placed the shard on the shelf above his desk beside the blue stone. On the fourth day, a rusted metal bolt, clearly manufactured, clearly not human. The threads were too wide and spiraled the wrong way. On the fifth day, a tooth, long curved, yellow-white. Daniel could not identify the species, and neither could the outpost scanner, which hummed and flashed and finally gave up with an error code he had never seen before. The shelf above his desk was filling up. By end of the second week, Rook had grown. He was the size of a large house cat now, his scales darkening from silver to a soft shade of storm gray. Along the spine, his wings were stronger. He could glide from the roof of the greenhouse to the medical alcove door in one smooth drop. Daniel measured him every few days and wrote the numbers in his private log. The growth rate was not natural. Nothing grew this fast. He still had not reported any of it. He told himself he would soon, when he understood more, when the outpost scanner could identify even one of the objects on the shelf, when he had a clearer picture of what Rook was. The truth was simpler than that. For the first time in 2 years, Daniel was not alone. He made 2 cups of tea in the morning now, even though Rook did not drink tea. He kept a small cushion beside his chair. He read reports out loud, and sometimes Rook would chirp at the funny parts as if he were really listening. On the 15th morning, the gift was different. Daniel found it beside his boots, placed carefully on the entry mat, a crystal shard no bigger than his thumb, sharp at one end and smooth at the other. It was not like the other objects. It glowed faintly from within, a pale violet light that pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Daniel picked it up. The outpost scanner on his belt began to beep, a soft warning tone he had never heard before. He held the shard close to the scanner. The beeping grew faster. The scanner screen showed one line of text: unknown energy signature, matching records unavailable. Daniel looked at Rook, who was watching him from the counter with serious amber eyes. No chirping this time, no wagging tail, just a long, steady look, the look of something that knew more than it could say. A cold feeling moved through Daniel's Jest. He placed the shard on the shelf with the others. He told himself he would report it in the morning. He did not. For 3 more weeks the gifts kept arriving. Daniel stopped counting them after the 30th. The shelf above his desk was full now, and a second shelf had joined it. Along the opposite wall, stones and bones, shards of glass and twisted metal, a small carved figure of something with too many arms, a fragment of dark cloth that did not burn when he held a flame to it, a feather that was not a feather at all, but something like braided black wire. Rook brought each one with the same quiet pride. He would place the item in some obvious spot, sit back, and wait for Daniel to notice. Daniel always noticed. He had started keeping a map. It was a habit from his survey training, and he could not shake it. Every time a new gift arrived, he would ask Rook to show him where. Rook understood, or at least seemed to. The small dragon would lead Daniel to the edge of the perimeter fence, point his snout in a direction, and chirp. Daniel would mark the line on a paper map taped to the wall above his desk. At first the lines looked random. After 40 gifts they did not. Every line pointed in some way toward the northern cliffs. The cliffs were outside the approved survey zone. Daniel had been told on his first day that the geological instability there made them unsafe for ground study. The orbital map showed only a rough shape, a long broken wall of black rock that ran for nearly 100 km. Along the edge of the continent, nothing else, no structures, no caves, no signs of anything interesting. But the gifts kept pointing there. And the gifts, when Daniel lined them up, by the date they had arrived, formed a pattern he could not ignore. The first objects Rook had brought were simple stones, flowers, small bones. The objects from the last 2 weeks were different, worked metal, carved shapes, pieces of what could only be called ruins. Rook was not just exploring, he was digging. Somewhere out there he had found something old, and he was bringing it back piece by piece from the outside in. Daniel sat at his desk one long evening, looking at the map and the shelves, and felt the first real turn of fear in his stomach. He wrote a careful message to Central Command. He did not mention Rook. He asked only about the history of Verath 9, whether any prior surveys had flagged unusual findings in the northern cliffs, whether any civilization had ever been recorded in this sector. He marked the message low priority and sent it through the standard channel. The reply came back 6 days later. It was short. No recorded history. Recommend no further inquiry. Maintain current post. Daniel read it 3 times. The wording was wrong. Central Command did not use phrases like recommend no further inquiry for routine questions. They used words like confirmed, cleared, or requesting clarification. This reply read like a closed door. He wrote again, asking a simpler question: had any ship ever crashed on Verath 9 in recorded time? The reply took 9 days. It said only negative. Daniel stopped writing. Rook was bigger now, much bigger. The size of a large hunting dog. His scales fully storm gray with darker streaks along the spine, his wings long enough to carry him from the ground to the greenhouse roof in a single slow beat. The small silver hatchling from the crater was gone. What stood in the outpost now was something else, something that still pressed its head into Daniel's hand when he came home, but something whose shadow on the wall was beginning to look less like a pet and more like a warning. Daniel did not love him any less. He loved him more, the way a man loves something he is afraid to lose. On a cold evening at the start of the 7th week, Rook did not come home. Daniel waited by the twin sun's set. He waited by the window until the first moon rose. He waited in the dark, scanner in his lap, until the second moon rose and the outpost fell into the deep silver light that came only late at night on Vareth 9. Rook had gone out before at dusk, but he always came back by dark always. Daniel told himself not to worry. Rook was strong. Rook knew this planet better than he did. He did not sleep. Sometime after the second moon reached its high point, the outpost scanner on his desk began to beep, the same soft warning tone he had heard once before. The day the crystal shard arrived, Daniel crossed the room in 3 steps and looked at the screen. Unknown energy signature, multiple sources, northern quadrant. He stared at the screen. The word multiple blinked in steady pale letters. He ran to the window. The tree line was dark, the perimeter fence quiet, the long grass still. Nothing moved but his skin was cold and his breath was short. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded like training from a long time ago was telling him to lock the doors. He locked the doors. He sat by the window with the scanner, his hand, and watched the dark. Beeping stopped after 20 minutes. The screen cleared. The outpost returned to normal. Daniel did not move. When the first light of morning began to show over the eastern ridge, something moved at the edge of the greenhouse. Daniel stood up. He walked slowly to the door, hand on the stun baton at his belt. Outside, a large storm gray shape was dragging something across the yard. The shape was limping. The thing it was dragging left a long dark streak behind it in the pale dirt. Daniel opened the door. Rook looked up at him with tired amber eyes. At his feet, the thing he had brought home was not a stone or a flower or a piece of old metal. It was a body. Daniel did not move for a long time. The body lay on its side in the pale morning dirt, tall, long-limbed, covered in black plating that fitted like armor, but looked grown rather than built, each piece overlapping the next in a strange organic pattern. Its hand, if that was the right word, was still wrapped around the hilt of a curved blade nearly as long as Daniel's arm. The blade was dark, not quite metal, and a faint heat still rose from its surface in the cold air. The helmet on the body's head had been shattered. Daniel did not want to look. He made himself look anyway. The face underneath was not a face. Daniel understood. Too many eyes, small and black, set in a narrow skull that came to a point at the chin, a mouth filled with small inward curving teeth. The skin was a deep blue-black and along the jawline ran a row of small holes that might have been for breathing or for something else. All of the eyes were open. All of them were still. Rook sat beside the body, chest heaving, one wing half folded against his side. Dark red was running down his left flank in a thin, steady line. Daniel dropped to his knees beside him. "What did you do?" he said. His voice came out quiet and thin. "What did you do?" Rook pressed his head into Daniel's chest and made the small pot boiling purr he made when he was hurt and trying to hide it. His scales were warm too. Warm. Daniel ran his hands along Rook's side, feeling for broken bones, and Rook flinched when his fingers reached the wound. The gash was long but not deep. Something curved had cut him, something. Like the blade in the dead thing's hand. Daniel looked at the body again. "Who are you?" he asked the corpse. The corpse did not answer. Daniel carried Rook inside, the young dragon was heavy now, almost too heavy to lift, but Daniel managed. He laid him on the cot in the medical alcove, the same cot where a small silver hatchling had first eaten red paste from a dish. And he cleaned the wound with slow, careful hands. Rook made no sound. His amber eyes stayed on Daniel's face the whole time. When the wound was bandaged, Daniel went back outside. He stood over the body for a long time. Then he took photographs, every angle. Close and far, he pulled the blade from the dead hand carefully and laid it on a piece of cloth beside the body. He did not touch the armor. He did not touch the skin. He went back inside and sent the photographs to Central Command, marked highest priority. This time, the reply came in 40 minutes. It was not a text reply. It was a live video call. The officer on the screen was a woman Daniel had never seen before, older than his last supervisor, with sharp eyes and a uniform he did not recognize. Behind her, the wall was blank and gray. No insignia, no station markings. "Hart," she said, "stay inside. Lock every door. Do not approach the body." Again. "What is it?" Daniel asked. She was quiet for a moment, then she said a word he did not know. "Vorn. I have never heard of them." "No," she said, "you would not have. Records were sealed before you were born." The Vorn were a hunter species. They were declared extinct 10,000 years ago after a war that cost 3 civilizations their home systems. They were not supposed to exist. Daniel's mouth went dry. "What do they hunt?" The officer looked at him for a long moment. "Dragons," she said, "specifically young dragons. The scales, when they are still growing, hold a kind of energy that can be harvested. The Vorn built their ships. With it, their weapons, their cities. They hunted the dragon worlds to the last egg, and when the eggs ran out, the other species rose up and burned the Vorn nests to glass." Daniel was very still. "One nest," the officer said. "We thought one nest might have survived. Sealed one, buried in deep rock, too deep to find. 9 was flagged as a possible site. 100 years ago, the survey was closed. The records were sealed. It was supposed to be dead." "It is not dead," Daniel said. "No," she said, "it is not." "The cliffs," Daniel said, "the northern cliffs. He has been bringing me pieces from the cliffs." The officer leaned closer to the screen. "Who has?" Daniel could not speak for a moment. "The dragon," he said. "I have a dragon. He is young, he is wounded, he killed this one." The officer's face did not change, but something behind her eyes did. "Hart," she said very carefully, "the Vorn do not come for a corpse, they come for a body. The scout you have in your yard was tracking the youngling. Now that the scout is dead, the nest knows where he is. They are coming." "How many?" Daniel said. "The records are old. A standard reclamation swarm would be 30 to 50. When? Soon. Can you send help?" The officer's voice was quiet. "The nearest military ship is 6 days out." Daniel looked through the window. The yard was empty. The body still lay where Rook had dropped it. Beyond the perimeter fence, the tree line was still. And then far out beyond the trees, at the edge of the northern horizon, he saw it. a thin line of dust rising slowly into the morning air, then another, then a third. Something was moving through the forest. Many somethings, and they were not slowing down. The scanner on his belt began to beep. Faster than it had ever beeped before. Daniel turned back to the screen. "They are already here," he said. The officer opened her mouth to answer. The call cut out. Daniel moved. He did not think thinking would come later if he lived. He slammed the main door shut and dropped the inner bolt. He ran to the back door and did the same. He pulled the emergency shutters down over every window, one by one, until the outpost interior went dim and the only light came from the overhead panels. He locked the greenhouse entry, then went back and locked it twice more because his hands were not steady and he did not trust the first 2 tries. Rook lifted his head from the cot, watching him. "Stay," Daniel said. The word was sharp. Rook blinked and laid his head back down, but his amber eyes did not close. Daniel went to the emergency locker. He had opened it twice in 2 years, both times for drills. The plasma rifle inside was old, a model the Survey Council had stopped issuing a decade ago. 2 spare power cells sat beside it, a medkit, a signal flare, a folding combat knife, nothing else. He took the rifle, he loaded the first cell, he clipped the second to his belt. Then he sat down at his desk and forced himself to breathe. He had 6 days until military help arrived. He had, if the officer was right, between 30 and 50 hunters coming through the forest right now. He had 1 wounded young dragon, 1 old rifle, 1 outpost built to keep out weather and small animals, and 1 man who was not a soldier and had never fired a weapon at anything living. He closed his eyes. He was not a soldier, he was a botanist. But he had spent 741 days on this planet, and in that time he had fixed every broken thing in this outpost at least once. He had rewired the water pump when it failed. He had rerouted the power grid when a meteor took out the main line. He had survived 2 acid storms, 3 predator tides, and 1 failed oxygen regulator, and he had done all of it alone. He knew this building better than any person alive. He opened his eyes. He started writing. Not a log, a list. Greenhouse irrigation, pressurized, acid-resistant tubing connected to nutrient tank. Nutrient tank contained a mild base used to correct soil. Mixed wrong, it could be made into something else. Perimeter fence, low voltage, designed to keep small animals out. The outpost generator could push 10 times that voltage through the line if the safety limiter was removed. Orbital beacon, designed to call the survey satellite overhead for routine check-ins. The satellite carried an atmospheric scrubber beam for cleaning debris fields. If aimed low, the beam could burn a wide area of ground. It would also burn the outpost, but only the top half. Greenhouse glass, reinforced, could be shattered inward with a controlled charge to create a killing field of flying shards. Roof access hatch, forgotten by most survey inspectors, small but big enough for Rook. Daniel wrote for 20 minutes. When he stopped, he had 3 pages. He stood up, picked up the rifle, and walked to the medical alcove. Rook was watching the door. His wound had stopped bleeding. His breathing was steady. He was still too young, too wounded, too small for what was coming. Daniel knelt beside the cot and put his hand on the storm gray head. I am sorry, he said. His voice was quiet. I should have reported you the first day. I should have called in the crater. I thought I was protecting you. I do not think I was. Rook pushed his head into Daniel's hand. They are coming for you, Daniel said. They want your scales, they want your kind, and they are not going to get you. Rook made the small pot boiling purr. Daniel stood up. Stay inside, he said, until I call. You then come fast. Rook nodded. Daniel did not know dragons could nod. He did not have time to think about it. He went to work. The next 3 hours were the hardest work of his life. He pulled the safety limiter off the perimeter generator with bare hands and a screwdriver, his knuckles bleeding by the end. He rewired the nutrient tank output into the greenhouse irrigation lines, mixed the base with a strong oxidizer from the cleaning supplies, and created a thin acid that would not eat through the tubing for at least 4 hours but would eat through almost anything else. He set small charges along the greenhouse glass, wired to a single switch at his desk. He climbed to the roof hatch and sighted his beacon at the satellite overhead, set the burn pattern for ground strike, locked the timer at a 10-second delay from his command. He came back down drenched in sweat, rifle slung across his back. He looked through the front window. The tree line was moving. He counted shapes. He stopped counting. At 20, more were coming behind them. Tall, black-plated curved blades. Their hands, some carried long, dark rifles Daniel did not recognize. They moved in a slow, spread formation, not running, not rushing, confident. The confidence of hunters who had done this before. Daniel's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the desk until they stopped. He looked at Rook. The young dragon had risen from the cot, wounded flank and all. He stood in the hallway now, storm gray scales catching the dim overhead light, amber eyes fixed on the window. His wings were half open. A low sound was coming from his chest, deeper than a purr, something older, something that had been buried in his blood for 10,000 years. The Vorn reached the perimeter fence. The first one put a hand on the wire. Daniel pressed the switch. The perimeter lit up white. And then from the tree line came the sound of the rest of them coming. The first wave of Vorn burned on the vents. 6 of them, maybe 7, their armor flashing white hot where the wire touched the plating. They fell without a sound. The Vorn did not scream when they died. They simply dropped black shapes in the pale dirt, smoke rising from the gaps in their helmets. The ones behind them did not stop. They stepped over their own dead and came on. Daniel had known the fence would only work once. He pulled the lever that cut the power before the wire melted. Then he ran to the greenhouse control panel and opened the irrigation valves full. The acid sprayed out of the overhead lines in a fine wide mist. It filled the greenhouse in seconds. Daniel had sealed the doors so the mist stayed inside, hanging in the air like pale fog. He waited. The Vorn came to the greenhouse first. It was the biggest structure, the obvious target. They cut through the outer door with their curved blades, fast and clean, and the first 4 of them stepped into the mist. Their armor hissed. Their plating ran like wet paint. They tried to turn around. They did not make it to the door. The ones behind them stopped. They understood now. They moved to the outpost instead. Daniel stood at the inner door, rifle in his hands. His palms were slick. His breath was loud in his own ears. "Rook," he said now. Rook moved. The young dragon hit the outpost door. From the inside, just as the Vorn reached it from the outside, Daniel pulled the door open, stepped back, and Rook launched himself through it in a low, gray blur. His wounded flank did not slow him. His tail caught the first Vorn across the chest and threw it 10 back against the greenhouse wall. His jaws closed on the second shoulder and tore through the armor like wet cloth. The third tried to raise its blade. Rook's tail took its hand off at the wrist. Daniel raised the rifle and fired through the open door. He had never shot at anything living before. He was not ready for the way it felt. The plasma round hit a Vorn in the chest and the body folded backward with a sound like a wet branch breaking. Daniel's hands did not shake this time. He fired again. Every shot found a target. The rifle was old, but the sight was true, and the Vorn were moving in a pack, and at 30 a pack was impossible to miss. The Vorn began to return fire. A dark bolt of something burned past Daniel's head and blew a hole through the wall behind him. He dropped to one knee, kept firing, felt another bolt tear through the sleeve of his jacket and graze his arm. The pain was sharp and bright and far away. Rook was in the middle of the yard now. 3 Vorn were down around him. 4 more were closing in with long rifles. Daniel saw one raise the barrel toward Rook's exposed side. He pressed the second switch on his desk, the one for the greenhouse glass. The charges blew outward in a long, clean line. The reinforced glass shattered into a storm of flying shards, and the wind carried them across the yard like 1,000 small knives. The 4 Vorn with the rifles went down screaming, the first sound Daniel had heard any of them make. Rook turned his head. His amber eyes found Daniel's across the yard. Daniel gave him a short nod. Rook understood. The young dragon took 3 running steps, opened his wings, and rose into the air for the first time in his life. The remaining Vorn, maybe 15 of them, broke formation. Half of them tried to follow Rook into the air with their rifles. Half of them charged the outpost door. Daniel pressed the third switch. Far above, the orbital satellite began its 10-second countdown. He had 10 seconds to get Rook out of the burn zone. "Rook," he shouted, "up all the way." "Up." Rook climbed. His wounded flank slowed him, but he climbed higher, past the tree line, past the beacon tower, past the safe limit of the burn zone. The satellite fired. The beam came down in a single column of white light, wider than the outpost, wider than the yard, bright enough to burn Daniel's eyes through the shutters. He did not see the Vorn die. He only heard it, a long roar, the sound of air itself being turned to fire, and then silence. When the beam cut off, the yard was a circle of black glass. The outpost was still standing, barely. The roof was on fire. The upper floor was gone, but the inner room where Daniel knelt on the floor with his arms over his head was still there. He stood up slowly. His arm was bleeding. His ears were ringing. He walked to the broken front door and stepped out into the scorched yard. Rook landed beside him a moment later. Wings smoking at the tips, storm gray. Scales streaked with soot. The young dragon was trembling, so was Daniel. They leaned against each other. The yard was full of dead Vorn. Daniel counted 41 bodies. No more were coming. He sat down in the black dirt. Rook sat down beside him. Neither of them spoke, because neither of them needed to. The military ship arrived 6 days later. Early. The officer who stepped down the ramp was the same woman from the call. She walked across the scorched ground, looked at the bodies, looked at the ruined outpost, looked at the young dragon curled beside Daniel on the medical cot through the broken window. She stopped in front of Daniel. Hard, she said, "How?" Daniel reached out and scratched Rook behind the small silver horns that had grown into full black curves. "He brought me gifts," he said. "I just brought better ones." Rook made the pot boiling purr. Far to the north, deep in the black cliffs, the last Vorn nest went quiet. It stayed quiet forever.